At the height of their power, they rivaled Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, fighting in great wars, though the details have been lost to the sands of time. The Egyptians would later call them brothers. The daughters of the horse lords of the Mitanni would bear Egyptian royal children, and after a violent collapse, their very existence would be forgotten for more than 3,000 years. The Mitanni was a society built around a king with authoritarian power and a chariot-warrior aristocracy. Among their innovations were the perfection, and likely the invention, of the spoke-wheeled chariot and scale armor, which would shape the future of warfare for the next 1,000 years. At the height of their power, which lasted for roughly 150 years, the Mitanni controlled a vast territory situated between the ancient and culturally influential power of Babylon to the southeast, the aggressive and warlike Hittite Empire to the northwest, and ancient Egypt at the height of its imperial power to the south. Controlling all the major land routes between these great perfords empires meant that trade was the lifeblood and source of fantastic wealth for the meant that the Mitanni had to be adept not only at warfare but also at diplomacy. The Mitanni Empire was primarily composed of Hurrian-speaking people who had migrated into northern Mesopotamia, becoming the dominant population there hundreds of years before the rise of the Mitanni Empire. They formed a patchwork of squabbling kingdoms that perhaps fought each other as often as their neighbors. This squabbling would come to an abrupt end when the Hittite king Mertzili shocked the Bronze Age world with his unprecedented march along the Euphrates River, leaving a trail of destruction. His army culminated in the sack of Babylon, destroying their palaces and temples and taking the royal family and gods as hostages back to the Hittite capital of Hattusa. A mini dark age ensued in Mesopotamia after this, as little to no surviving records elucidate this period. A little less than 100 years later, the kingdom of Mitanni was well established, likely formed very soon after Mertzili's sack of Babylon from a confederation of Hurrian states. Very little, besides the names of Mitanni's early kings, is known about this period, and dates are very uncertain. Around 1550 BC, a Hittite text first briefly references the Mitanni state, and in 1500 BC, Pharaoh Thutmose I made the first Egyptian reference to them after crossing the Euphrates River and campaigning in their territory. The first and perhaps greatest of Mitanni's kings, Shalsatar, is believed to have beaten the Egyptians further south and conquered Assyria, taking the gods from their temples and the gold and silver doors off their hinges to be used at his royal palace in the Mitanni capital of Washu. Troops were stationed throughout Assyria to guarantee its loyalty. Shalsatar's image was so impactful that, during the reign of his successors, his royal seal and name were often used instead of their own. The Mitanni state developed a well-organized military, with the king at its head. Beneath him were client kings who referred to him as their father, while other districts were governed by appointed bureaucratic administrators, each with its own fortified capital city. Even small towns and mayors' houses in the countryside were fortified, with local militia units maintaining them. The centerpiece of the Mitanni army was the Mariano, professional military men bound by oath directly to the king. The Mariano were the elite core of the army and controlled sprawling estates where horses were raised and trained for war. The Mitanni were acknowledged as the masters of horses and chariotry of their day, as evidenced by surviving Hittite texts. One such text describes in great detail the proper conditioning of a warhorse over a 214-day period, utilizing interval training that has only been reintroduced into equestrian training in the last 30 years. Scale and lamellar armor also appear to be innovations of the Hurrian, as evidenced by other people in the Near East using terms derived from the Hurrian word for scale mail to describe armor. After nearly a century of recurrent war, with one side gaining the upper hand and then the other, the Egyptians and Mitanni negotiated a peace and more or less permanent borders between their two nations. After proposing peace on 7 different occasions, the daughter of the Mitanni king was sent to Egypt to marry Pharaoh Thutmose IV. In Mesopotamian culture, it was more prestigious to be the father-in-law of another king, while in Egypt, it was prestigious to have many foreign wives. Both empires made a mutual protection pact against the Hittites and referred to each other as beloved brothers in their correspondence, sending each other lavish gifts. Over the next few generations, the pharaohs and Mitanni kings would repeat this process. The Mitanni kings traveled the 1,300 miles between their two empires. Capitals and were received at the Egyptian court in what must have been a memorable spectacle. There is even a theory that Nefertiti was a Mitanni princess. Empires were peaceful and prosperous for a time, but the beginning of the end came with the murder of the Mitanni king. His younger brother, still a child, was placed on the throne as a puppet ruler. Diplomatic relations with Egypt were cut off, possibly to avoid Egyptian retaliation, as the murderer may have been a Hittite or Assyrian agent. The young king bided his time and eventually executed all the assassins. He then fought off a Hittite invasion, his first priority being to reopen relations with Egypt. he recounted his tribulations and negotiated another marriage, and lavish gifts were once again exchanged. However, at the Mitanni court, two factions emerged: a pro-Hittite faction led by the king's brothers and a pro-Assyrian faction led by his sons. The greatest conqueror of all, the Hittite kings, Supain, after successful campaign to the east, aided by Tushratta's brother, whom he installed as a puppet king, taking advantage of the family infighting. Assyria became independent without a fight. Tushratta was then murdered by one of his sons. Suppiluliuma invaded the Mitanni heartland, installing Tushratta's brother. Although the Mitanni undoubtedly petitioned the Egyptians for aid, these events coincided with the turbulent reigns and internal strife of pharaohs Akhenaten. It seemed to be in both the Hittites and Babylonians' interests to keep a Mitanni state alive, as they both feared the rise of the warlike Assyrians. The region became a battleground for the Hittites and Assyrians. In 1290 BC, the Assyrian king, Adad-nirari, destroyed the Mitanni capital of Washbukani, burning it to the ground, deporting its population, and making slaves out of the royal family that had once been their masters. Over the next 100 years, the Assyrians completely obliterated the memory of the Mitanni. It would not be until the late 19th century, over 3,000 years later, that fragments of the names and deeds of the Mitanni would be made known to mankind once again.